All right, guys, so let's kind of recap and see where we are right now. So we have our back end, we know that. We have our MongoDB database. We have our API endpoints. We implemented React, and we basically linked the React dev server with the backend server so we can just run that in a single command. We have our main app component, which is app.js in our source folder. We have our assets hooked up in index.html, Bootstrap, and all that, font awesome. We have our custom app CSS file, and we have our image folder with the one image that we need. That's just the showcase for the landing page. All right, so what we're going to do now is start to implement some of the layout components, okay, which is the nav bar and the footer. And I'm also going to call the landing page a layout component as well. So let's create in our source folder a new folder called components, okay, and this is where all of our components are going to go. All right, and we're not going to deal with Redux just yet either, okay. So in components, let's create another folder called layout. And inside layout, we're going to have a file called uppercase and navbar.js. Okay, all our components will start with an uppercase. Let's also create a footer.js, and let's also create a landing.js. Okay, we will be using React Router, of course, because we have so many pages, but we're going to do that in a little bit as well. Basically, what I want to do is just get the overall layout as far as the nav bar and the footer done, and we'll just add the landing page for now, and then replace it with the router, which will show whatever the current route is. Okay, so let's start off with the nav bar. So we'll go in here. Now, if you installed the extension, where is it? Right here, ES7 React Redux GraphQL. If you installed this, then you can do shortcuts like RFC tab. And what that does is it gives us a functional component. In React, we can have either a functional component or a class-based component. Now, functional components should really only be used for basically dumb components, components that don't need to use any lifecycle methods or anything like that, that don't have state, just basically just display dumb components, okay? Now, we're not going to have many components like this, so we're not going to use this that much. At this point, our navbar is going to be just for display, but later on, we're going to have some state to our navbar. We're going to need it to basically decide if it's going to display like guest links, like sign in and login, or member links or user links like logout and dashboard, stuff like that. So we're going to deal mostly with class-based components, and I'm just going to start out with that. So let's do RCC tab. All right, and this is what a class-based component looks like. And you can, if you don't have that extension or you're using a different browser, you can just type this out. All right, so we're going to call our component navbar, capital N. We're going to not do export default right here. We're going to get rid of that, and then we're going to move that down here and just export navbar. So that's the basic layout of our component. Now, render is a lifecycle method which will render whatever it is we put in here. By default, it's just some div tags if you're using the component, the extension that I just used. But you want to make sure that you return whatever is in this render. Okay, you can do other logic up here. You can assign variables and all that, but the return is for your JSX. Okay, React uses JSX, which is JavaScript syntax extension. It's basically HTML inside your JavaScript. One of the biggest differences, though, you can't do like div class something. Instead, we have to do class name. All right, so if we're going to do any copying and pasting from our Bootstrap theme, then we have to make sure we change class to class name. All right, so keep that in mind. And I know most of you guys probably know this. As I said in the beginning, this isn't a beginners, React beginners course, but I still do want to explain some of the basics just in case. So right now, what we'll do is let's also open up the one of the pages from our theme, from our navbar theme, which I have. Let's see. have right here. So you guys should have this. It should be in a zip file in the first video of this section. So let's open up. We'll just open up the landing page. I'll open it in Sublime so you can definitely tell the difference. All right, and this is basically our navbar, okay, the guest version. So that's what we'll start with. So I'm going to just grab all of this instead of typing it all out. So we'll copy that, and let's go ahead and put this right in here in the return. So we'll paste that in, and we need, remember, we need to change all these classes to class name. So in VS Code, I'm not sure about other editors, but in VS Code you can highlight and just keep hitting Control D, and it'll just select all of the matching values. So all the matching classes, we'll just grab them all like that, and we'll change them to class name. Okay, make sure that you don't change this class. All right, so make sure you hover over the first attribute of class. So if we go ahead and do that, let's save this. And now what we'll do is try to display this in our or in our application. So we'll go to app.js, and from app.js, what we want to do is bring in that component. Okay, so we'll go up top here, and let's say import navbar from, and it's going to be /components/ remember we put it in a layout folder, and then navbar. Okay, now that we brought that in, we should be able to display it down here. So let's replace, or we'll just go right above the H1, and let's put in navbar like that. Okay, so we'll save. Let's take a look at our application, and there we go. We have our navbar. Okay, there's nothing really to it. It's just static markup, but the component is displaying. Now let's do the same with the footer. So we'll go back, and let's go to footer.js. Now the footer, I know we're not going to need any kind of lifecycle methods or anything like that, so I will use a functional component here. So I'm going to do RFC tab. So this is just a functional component, export default. We're using an arrow function. You could name this and then export it down here, but this is fine. It's basically just gonna be a footer tag with a copyright inside of it. So we can actually just type this out real quick. So if we say footer, and we should be able to use Emmet here. So if I say footer, and let's give it a class of bg-dark. We also want text white, MT5, which is margin top 5, push everything up a little bit. Let's do padding dash or P-4, padding 4 on all sides, and text dash center. And if I hit tab, notice what's really cool is that it actually uses class name. Okay, because of some of the settings that we did in the beginning, it will actually use the JSX attribute of class name. So now in the footer, we're going to say copyright. Let's put our little copy symbol. And what I'm going to do, instead of just putting 2018, I want this to change depending on the year. Now, since we're using JSX, we can use curly braces, and we can actually put JavaScript expressions in here. So I can say new date, and then I want to get the year, so I'm going to do get full year. Okay, and that'll give us the current year, and then I'll just do dev connector. And that's it. That's our footer. Okay, so let's go back to app.js. Let's bring in the footer just like we did the navbar. It's in the layout folder. So footer. And then we'll change this to footer. And we'll go down here under the H1 and say footer. All right, let's save it. Let's take a look. And there's our footer. And notice it says 2018. So the last thing we want to do is implement the landing component, which will go in the middle here. So let's go back and let's go to landing.js. Now landing is going to be a class-based component, so we'll go ahead and put in RCC tab, or you can type it out. It's going to be called landing. let's go ahead and get rid of the export default and put that down at the bottom. So export default landing. And then let's see what we're going to do here is, I guess we'll just grab the landing from the theme. So I'll go ahead and open up landing HTML again with Sublime Text. That's how I'm going to differentiate when we're actually looking at just the theme or we're looking at our app. Okay, we'll open the theme in Sublime. You don't have to, but just so you know what's going on with what I'm doing. All right, now landing is pretty simple. It's basically just this div right here. So we're going to go ahead and grab that. We'll copy that, and then we'll come over here and we'll paste it inside the return in the render. Again, we need to change all the classes to class names. So let's do Control D, select all these classes, change them to class name. All right, and then one thing that is very important to understand in React is if you want to link to another route, right now we don't have the router installed, but we're not going to be using a href. We're going to be using a link component. Now we haven't installed the router yet, so I'm not going to add it just yet, but just keep that in mind. We'll be changing this to use link instead of an a tag. It'll be actually link and then a to attribute instead of href, but we'll leave it for now. So let's save this. Let's go back to app.js and bring in landing. And we'll go down here, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this h1. We don't need this anymore. I'm actually going to put a div here, not a dov, but a div, and give it a class of container because I want everything to be inside a container. Actually, scratch that. We're not going to do that yet. I don't want the landing to be in a container because it'll push the image and everything into the middle. So let's just put in landing, and now we should have our all three components displayed. So let's save, let's go back, and there it is. All right, so what we have here is three different components, and right now they're all just pretty much dumb components. They don't have anything in them except just static markup. We're obviously going to change that, but what I want to do next, we're actually going to go to the next section because we need to set up the React router. We need to be able to navigate to different components based on the URL. So for instance, the profile will be /profile/ whatever the handle, developers will be / I think profiles is what we're going to call it, sign up page will be /register, login /login. So we need the router to be able to do that. All right, so that's what we're going to get into next, and then we'll start to create more components, and then we'll actually add some logic, and then we'll finally we'll implement Redux, which is going to really start us off into putting this together. All right, so I will see you in the next section.